Religion and politics have always been an uneasy mix in Australia. In the lead up to the 2004 federal election, there was a substantial shift in the Australian political landscape. Conservative Christianity went on a crusade into the mostly secular world of Australian politics. Front and centre in the March of the Christian Soldiers was the Family First Party, which was born out of the Pentecostal Assemblies of God Church. From a standing start, only 12 weeks out from the poll, the Family First strategists put a carefully orchestrated plan into action to try and win enough seats in the federal Senate to give them the balance of power. Australian politics was about to change.
An awful lot of people in the media were happy to write off Family First as a bunch of right-wing fundamentalist loonies. That's probably because the Assemblies of God Church believe that the Bible is the literal and inspired word of God and that you must be born again and speak in tongues. They tend to be very conservative voters. One commentator even talked about them as one nation at prayer. But again, as with One Nation, the media misread the mood of the nation.
I think there is a deal of middle-class concern in Australia about where Australia's going. Middle-class people have got the money, but they're saying, oh, we did something with the values things. You know, we're concerned about where our kids are going and what the future will be for our kids. Now, there is evidence of a deep hunger for some sense of moral and spiritual core, however that's reflected. And I think there is a sense in which Family First are picking up on many of those sorts of issues.
Family First weren't the only ones responding to the values barometer of the nation. In the months leading up to the election, Federal Treasurer Peter Costello appeared at the Evangelical Hillsongs Conference in Sydney to an audience of more than 14,000.
We need a return to faith and the values which have made our country strong.
It seemed that the time was right for a well-organised, conservative family values party, and Family First answered the call. The party was conceived in Adelaide and emerged from the Paradise Assemblies of God Church. Retired pastor Andrew Evans and newly mantled senior pastor, his son Ashley, felt a simultaneous call of God to plant their cross in state parliament.
All I know is that when you get a desire for a long period of time that keeps returning to you, you've got to investigate and take a lot of notice because it could be a God thing.
Just every morning that I'd wake up, I had this very, very strong, kind of overpowering sense that more needed to be done for the families of Australia, more needed to be done, and something had to happen, not just in the realm that I operate, which is, people in the community, and just from a spiritual perspective, but from a values perspective and from a perspective that would engage in the political debate over important issues.
Both of us, coming from different directions, had the same thought that we should get involved in the political process because of the trends that were happening in society. We needed to have a strong conservative, socially conservative voice there.
Andrew Evans won a seat in the South Australian Upper House on his first attempt, and with one other independent member, now holds the balance of power. It was perceived as a miracle in anyone's book. For Family First, it was the inspiration to pursue that bigger and more powerful sphere of influence, the Federal Senate. After a thorough screening process based on political potential and personal morality, state Senate candidates were selected from within the Christian evangelical ranks. Andrea Mason has a law degree and works in state parliament. She is passionate about family and Indigenous issues. For 29 years, John Lewis has been senior pastor of an Assemblies of God church in Brisbane. He sees himself as a social and morals crusader. Steve Fielding describes himself as a family man who works in marketing. He became a local councillor in Knox City in 2002. And Jackie Petrusma is a registered nurse and mother of 4 with degrees in education and commerce. She's national sales manager for a pharmaceutical company. "12 weeks out from the election, the new Family First Senate candidates met in Melbourne to spend 2 days thrashing out policy and party rules.
Accessibility, affordability via means testing, and a mix of private and public systems.
It was up to the Family First federal chairman, Peter Harris, to get the new recruits into shape. Peter Harris is a property developer, and his own Family First credentials are strongly underpinned by his prominent role in Adelaide's Paradise Church.
For a person to go and have a baby in Sydney, they're looking at $5,000 out-of-pocket expenses if they want to.
Today we've got the #1 Senate candidates together for the first time really that they've come together as a collective unit, and we're talking about what are the things that are important to the Family First Party, what are the things that we want to be known for, and really, I guess, fine-tuning what our position is on those issues. And then what we're going to do is have some media training so that we have a collective message and we clearly understand how we want to articulate our message in the public domain.
We want to defend our Christian schools to not have to employ homosexuals.
We can't legislate about that. We can.
But they give their values to the children.
The Greens have specifically said they want gays into Christian schools. They make that a clear goal.
Yeah. If I send my kids to a Christian school, I want them to be brought up in a Christian environment. I think the community expects that.
Because Muslims should have the same
and they want the same choice too.
So how's this? So any church or any religious-based institution is allowed the freedom of choice to employ those who are closely aligned with their belief systems, something like that.
Yeah.
People are concerned about Family First, the ones that really worry about Family First, because these are people that actually believe, and they believe in the Bible, they believe in Christianity. They're not once a month go to church type people, they are believers. And that's seen as something spooky to a lot of others. It's seen as people who might insist on rules, might insist on a morality. And I think a lot of people get freaked by that.
That there are a whole bunch of people that seriously can't take their kids to the doctor because they can't afford it.
If we achieve 1 or 2 Senate seats, I would be over the moon, because I think it's not an easy area to break into. And I think it's the right timing, because I get a sense that people are looking for something else and that people are despondent about what's currently available. And I know we've heard it all before, but we actually have a network of people that are going to be around the nation and communicating with the nation, and I actually think that this could be a history-making time for Australian politics.
Social justice on page 17.
Yep. Have we got a policy on should we say sorry to the Aboriginal people?
My position is that I'm concerned about what the repercussions are of actually saying sorry in terms of compensation and all of the other issues, because there must be a clear reason why our Prime Minister has taken this point of view.
If you're saying that there were significant financial implications of saying sorry, then we've got to look at limiting those, because why should the families of today suffer with those financial burdens? Two wrongs don't make a right.
And we did stand up and give voice to those that were being mistreated. And so as a nation, there is a sense of national shame, maybe not on an individual basis, but on a corporate basis there is. And so we would ask the head of our political system, the head of government, the Prime Minister of Australia, to apologise in terms of the national issue, but not necessarily on a personal level.
To me, if you've done something wrong,
You could have paid for it, yeah.
there's a consequence to it, and isn't that what we want the principle to be in our families?
Absolutely. I agree with you.
I agree. The bulk of people think that we only think right-wing issues, but we actually do care about the environment. I actually do care about us saying sorry on this issue. We do care about social justice issues and all those sorts of things. And if we may as well not have a policy on this if we don't believe that we should not say an unreserved sorry.
The real dilemma for many Christians is to be as to whether they join political parties and become sort of the salt of the earth within that political party, or they form distinct Christian parties. The history of Christian parties has not been a very good one. In Australian context, we only have to look at the DLP, but if you go to Europe and you look at parties like the Christian Democrats and others, the compromises and deals necessary in politics have usually inevitably corrupted those Christian groups who want to go into politics as a Christian party. It's not been a good history.
Tasmanian Senate candidate Jackie Petrusma knows what it's like to do it tough. After the breakup of her first marriage, she was a single mother for 9 years. It was during that difficult period that she became a committed Christian.
Love you. Bye-bye.
Jackie had been told that her last pregnancy needed to be terminated because tests indicated that her unborn child had Down syndrome.
And the whole way up until I was 24 weeks, the doctors were still saying to me all the time, you need to have an abortion. My mother, who's actually head of the midwifery units in one of the hospitals, she's a midwife, but she was still saying, you need to have an abortion. And then, of course, she was born without Down syndrome. And it just really shows you just how much this is a fight that against the powers of darkness, that we really need to be out there, praying, interceding, trying to make a difference. Family First isn't a Christian party. It's been started up by Christians. All the people running for Parliament are Christians. However, we see ourselves as a values-based party because basically we know that we have to be as wise as a snake but as gentle as a dove, because if we've got to get out there to the world and try and change values, we can't go out there being a Christian party because most of the world will wipe us off.
Family First gained their support base through mobilising networks through the Assemblies of God. Yet, when they presented themselves to the Australian public, they attempted to disguise that. Now, some people are going to be cynical about that. They're going to say, now, hang on, let's be honest here. You are either a political party that is Christian and are proud of it, or you are a conservative party using Christian networks and trying to disguise it.
Australians generally despise wowsers, and Family First deliberately tried not to look too Christian, based on the experience of the electorate with people like Fred Nile, who was so overtly Christian that it turned people off. Now, that policy of not being overtly Christian, in fact, cost them votes amongst the Christian subculture.
You've heard about the Family First Party?
We're just now over there, and John's just told me a bit more about it. Well, I've got 6 children, 10 grandchildren, 4 great-grandchildren.
Yeah, I'll bring Nikki up. And there's nothing better than family, is there?
We have a picnic lunch.
Nothing better.
I've got 4 sons, 10 grandchildren.
What a great contribution to our great nation. Nice to talk.
Okay, we needed your name, so
John Lewis. Thank you. John Lewis. Not related to Jerry Lewis, Wally Lewis, or Terry Lewis. Uniquely John Lewis. Vote 1, Family First. We will be looking after the family.
Are you just practising now?
I am.
John Lewis was a sheet metal worker when he was first called to be a Pentecostal pastor. He is now on the national executive of the Assemblies of God.
We do not believe that same-sex marriages is a healthy direction for any nation to take.
John tends his flock at Brisbane's Northside Christian Church and set up their extensive social program and school.
Oh, amazing. Have you seen the prices?
$1. What a wonderful outfit for $1. I have grandchildren, so I know the prices of little children's clothing today.
Yeah, it's
That's why we
beautiful.
do that in this shop, because we know that mums struggle with those sort of issues. Being a pastor in this church for almost 30 years qualifies me to at least talk about the everyday issues families face. The divorce issues, the breakdown, the children problem, the drugs, alcohol problem. And I could see that we could improve greatly the possibilities of the future for our young people with good legislation, excellent education, bringing in things that will help them to become better citizens for the future.
With less than 8 weeks until the federal election, most of Australia had not yet heard of the Family First Party.
The crowds will beware. They'll be...
A nationwide launch was designed to capture the hearts and minds of the mostly bussed-in church faithful and the initially cautious attention of the television media. John Lewis chose to arrive in full presidential hoopla style, with the desired result.
Let's welcome John Lewis, his wife.
The Pentecostals really know how to swing it. They are major entrepreneurs. Hillsong Church produces a weekly TV show, got ARIA award-winning albums with a worldwide circulation. Paradise Church is the home of Guy Sebastian. These people don't wait for the media spotlight. They set it up and switch it on themselves.
Family First is not just another political party. Our priority is the health, well-being and common wealth of all Australian families.
What's interesting about Family First is that they are almost a product of a sort of market-driven Christianity that's very familiar in the Pentecostal scene. That is, it's very freewheeling, very built on charismatic figures and charismatic leadership.
Pope John Paul II said, as the family goes, so goes the nation, and so goes...
What's very interesting is whether it can in fact graft itself into the Australian political psyche.
The launch in Melbourne saw dozens of the new party faithful clamouring to sign up as party members and polling booth workers.
We care about a value-driven society. We care about the definition of marriage. We care about the issues that affect everyday Australians. We care about what is happening in our schools and how we teach our children about sex and all of those sorts of issues.
It's time. It's time for a change. It's time as a nation we started to put families first.
Although he's a born-again Christian, Steve Fielding is the only state Senate candidate not from the Assemblies of God. His recent position with local council means that he's the only candidate with any practical political experience.
Growing up in a family of 16 children, you learnt the art of politics and the arts of numbers. Your parents would not listen to you unless there's enough of you wanting to go a certain way. So you quickly learnt that if you needed to get something done, you needed to have the numbers.
Steve and his family live in Melbourne's eastern suburbs. Though he's a qualified engineer, Steve has worked as general manager of Victoria's largest superannuation fund for the past 3 years.
How's that? The way the Australian political system works, it needs a legitimate third party. And with the Democrats, I suppose, losing, credibility with the electorate, a lot of people feel as if they've, abused the trust that people placed in. They're looking for a third party. And up until this stage, they've only had the Greens to actually, to really look at. And we want to be a positive third party and pull out the best from the left and pull the best out of the right. So we want to pull the best out of Labor and Liberal. I suppose that's where Family First would really sit.
In a house in the northeastern suburbs of Adelaide, the Federal Office of Family First is abuzz with word that their South Australian party launch made it into the national press.
Here it is.
got?
Oh,
fantastic.
I don't know what page it's on, but...
Okay. Here, Rebecca, this is from the weekend. Now, she said it's going to be, here we go.
There you are!
Here we go. Oh my God.
There it is.
We need to find out what's happening in Queensland and Victoria and New South and Tassie with their launches. See, they got the Australian as well as we did, so that'd be quite nice.
That's
okay,
cool.
well, I'm going to get on the phone.
On behalf of the Vibes National Editions Country Basketball and Hip Hop Challenge, we'd like to officially welcome Andrea Mason to the event and make sure we all vote. She's going to hold down Senate for us.
Andrea Mason's appointment as federal leader of the party had confounded those critics who had prematurely categorised Family First as ignorant right-wingers.
I'm standing for the Senate for Family First. Yeah.
Andrea already had a public profile as a former international netballer. She brings to the party a strong Christian heritage. Her father was a famous pastor in the outback missions of Australia.
This is a great nation, and there's been a lot of things that have happened in this country, both positive and negative, and Family First is an opportunity to be part of that. And I believe that what we want to do is very positive, and I think that as we get out into the community and start to speak to people, things will start to make sense to them as well in terms of what we're wanting to do.
Andrea is a worship leader at Paradise Community Church, but in the lead up to the election was asked to speak at a number of Assemblies of God churches about her political ambitions.
I come from Kalgoorlie, Western Australia, a mining town, a rough mining town, and now I'm standing here today as someone who possibly is on the threshold of going into federal politics, as the first Indigenous woman ever in the 103 years history of this country to do that. How does that happen? Things just don't happen. And I want to share with you...
The appearance of Family First candidates in church pulpits fueled the debate about the separation of church and state.
People who say keep religion out of politics, I don't understand. I don't understand what they're saying, because we all act out of some sort of moral belief, which usually is informed by some sort of religion or the vestiges of a religion, and to say, no, you've got to take that part of your personality, that part of your beliefs of immorality, and put that to one side. What's left? What are you using to judge whether things are good or bad?
There was this tradition in Australian politics that you didn't wear your religious faith on your sleeve. I mean, everybody knew that the Labor Party members were all Catholic. It didn't need to be said. They didn't need to stand up and say, I'm Catholic. The fact that they were Labor meant that they were Catholic, almost by definition. But we've seen a change, and it's a change which I think reflects some of the sorts of changes we're seeing in politics in the US. And we're seeing people being much more open about their religious beliefs and their religious values.
The traditional tensions that exist between church and state, I think, are best articulated by the South African experience of Desmond Tutu. For years, when South Africa was under the apartheid regime, Desmond Tutu and priests in the Anglican Church actively supported the move for change. And they were called communists and they were called everything else. Once the ANC had achieved government in South Africa, Desmond Tutu instructed his priests to sever their links with the ANC. And when he was asked why, he said, the church must always maintain a critical collaboration with government. That is, it's got to always stand independent of government and not be seen as an agent of government, so that it can critically evaluate government.
They're off. The Prime Minister fired the starter's gun when he drove to Yarralumla shortly after 11:30 to get approval from Governor-General Michael Jeffrey for an election on October the 9th.
The political landscape was quite interesting. The coalition was perceived to be somewhat on the back foot under the pressure of the new Labor leader with his reading to children, his triangulation of politics. The minor parties were even more interesting. The Greens were on the up and up, and there was a perception that the Labor Party could get across the line with Green preferences. The Democrats were gone for all money, and Andrew Bartlett was reduced to doing bungee jumping to get them on television. One Nation was a write-off. Pauline Hanson was reduced to chatting up truckies at truck stops. And then out of right field came Family First.
And with the real prospect that the minor parties could hold the balance of power in the Senate, Julian, can we just have a look at how the chamber would look under that?
Sure. Well, this is the upper house as it currently stands. But if the Pentecostal Christian Party Family First gets the balance of power, then it'll probably look a lot more like this.
The election clock was ticking, and the realities of campaign costs were setting in. It was time for Family First to rally the troops. Candidates and officials were dispatched to fundraising dinners around the country.
I don't know if you realise, but we have got the potential to determine the next government of Australia. Yeah, that's right. Do you believe that? Yes. The major parties and their senior leaders are in dialogue with us right now over these coming next 10 days, talking with us about where we're going to make preferences. The media are chasing us about where we're going to preference.
The assembled were politely asked to put their money where their morals were.
Out of this room, imagine if every person said, I can put $1,000 on my credit card. That would bring in a significant amount. But more than that, imagine if every church leader or business leader here said, we're good for 10. Imagine if there were some people here tonight that could, with a stretch, say, I could put 100K in.
As election campaigning went into full swing, Tasmanian candidate Jackie Petrusma's kitchen became her war room.
Family First nationwide have looked at Tasmania, and they actually believe that they've got the best chance of succeeding in Tasmania. The contact that we've been having as a party from the major parties are very concerned where our preferences are going to go.
People are taking us very seriously. They know that we're going to appeal to voters that Liberal and Labor, Greens and Democrats won't. There's a big group of people who are disenfranchised with all the parties, and that's who we're going after.
This is an exciting morning.
Yep.
The Senate draw in Brisbane was an opportunity to do some final wheeling and dealing for crucial preferences, the lifeblood of minor parties. The party felt that John Lewis had a strong chance of winning a Queensland Senate seat until the political waters were muddied by the surprise re-emergence of Pauline Hanson. Her presence sent the media into a feeding frenzy. As the recently imprisoned ex-leader of the One Nation Party, it seemed that she still commanded a significant following.
Number 17.
Number 17, Family Trust.
Parties now, I'm going to take a vote and have a look at what everyone else stands for. I will be prefacing very high up the Family First, the Fishing Party.
Australian politics sometimes creates strange bedfellows. The only chance Family First had in the Senate was to swap preferences with the other minor parties, and that was always going to be risky. Some of their church-based followers were critical of their deal with the Democrats, for instance, who had policies in favour of gay marriage and euthanasia.
Politics is essentially the art of compromise. Puritanism in politics will always put you on the margin. Always put you on the margin. Now, if that's where you want to be, as for instance the Australian Democrats for many years were when they said our job's to keep the bastards honest, they actually knew where they were. They were going to be pure on the margin players. As soon as you attempt to say, no, we're going to become the mainstream, then inevitably you've got to do deals to do that. And there's a sense in which that becomes then very problematic for parties that have a very idealistic basis.
After negotiating with the Prime Minister, Family First has decided to direct preferences to the government in 109 lower house seats.
The only two Liberals not preferenced by Family First was sitting member Warren Ench, a supporter of gay marriage, and Dr Ingrid Tall, who is openly gay.
Family First has taken into account the cross-preference deal between the ALP and Greens in the lower house.
Don't risk it. A vote for the Greens is a vote for extremes.
Heroin? Ecstasy? The Greens want to legalise the whole lot.
They're giving my kids easy access to marijuana.
That's not green.
Family First had identified the Greens as their major political rival and made a frontal attack to reveal their supposedly hidden agenda.
That's not green, Bob. That's extreme.
Family First spent $600,000 on advertising in the campaign, much of it on negative advertising attacking the Greens. Now that's almost twice as much as the Greens' own advertising budget and 4 times the advertising budget of the Democrats.
Family First were right to go hard against the Greens because it is a competing ideology, it's a competing religion. Fundamentally, those are the two big religions grasping for the votes of the religiously uncommitted in this society. It works like this. G.K. Chesterton, the great Roman Catholic writer, said that when man stops believing in God, he doesn't believe in nothing, he'll believe in anything. And what's come to fill that vacuum? The Greens.
Can you imagine extreme Greens running the show? It'd be chaos.
Whoever holds the balance, I want them to put my family first.
Put the balance of power in your family's hands.
Attack advertising has a very long and disreputable history in political campaigning, and it's been used very successfully, for example, in American presidential campaigns. Now, what we know about attack advertising is that it actually works. It's very, very effective. So there is no doubt that the attack advertising that the Family First Party ran was effective in diminishing the Greens' vote. But the long-term problem is that it contributes to the ongoing public cynicism about politics and the electoral process. So here you have a party that really wants to promote positive values, which is in actual fact, by its own campaign, undermining a sense of well-being about the political system.
Let me just talk about Family First. It's an unchristian group. It seems to be motivated by hate. It has been talking with the Prime Minister about how to get extra representation in the Parliament because the Prime Minister wants to use Family First to get control of the Senate. Family First, I believe, their policies actually threaten young Australians, whereas the Greens are trying to minimise that threat.
What a beautiful man.
Family First was still struggling with their profile. Their media events and press conferences were largely ignored.
I'll make my crowd. Can I get my crowd back where they were?
Even when they brought out the big guns like Brisbane Lion and high-profile Christian Sean Hart.
Come on, Sean!
Candidates were frustrated at not being able to get their message across to the electorate.
Republic of Australia, that we really do believe that they need to know what the Greens represent.
There's an old saying, be careful what you pray for, you might get it. Now, by the last week of the campaign, the question for Family First was, is any publicity good publicity?
Family First has a policy where...
The national media spotlight fell on Family First when a Brisbane party volunteer made a comment at a pre-polling booth that lesbians like Ingrid Tall should be burnt at the stake along with all the other witches.
Let me clearly make it known. The expression that all lesbians ought to be burnt at the stake is a total misrepresentation of Family First.
If John is saying that they're not anti-lesbian, then why on earth is Ingrid Tall not getting preferences?
Ingrid Tall would not represent the family values that we represent.
Because she's a lesbian?
Because she's a lesbian.
Okay, so you are opposed to people on the basis of their sexuality, not on what they do, but on the basis of what their sexuality is. I think that's totally intolerant and un-Christian myself.
I don't think you'd say unchristian.
Well, I do. I know plenty of Christians. I'm married to a Christian. There are plenty of Christians who believe in tolerance, inclusiveness, justice, and not being judgmental
you may not understand
about something over which they have no
well.
control.
The radio switchboard went into meltdown as the people of Brisbane weighed in on the spirited debate. Gay activists, the Greens and the Socialist Alliance responded immediately with a rally and some political street theatre outside Brisbane's Liberal Party headquarters.
I think there's nothing better and more necessary than morals in the Australian election. And as part of our deal, we've got somebody from Family First here today who'd like to hand over the final preference deal. Thank you for coming to witness it.
Well, thank you, Mr Prime Minister.
Frankly, I'm not that keen on associating with lesbians, but whatever it takes to get elected.
Sir, here are your lesbians. Do
Right,
as
thank
you'd
you.
like.
What do we do with witches?
Burn them!
Once you start scratching the surface of Family First, you find a very extreme party, a sort of religious right fundamentalism, which you don't see outside of the Bible Belt in the US. It's an extremely dangerous new emergence in Australian politics.
Adding fuel to the media flames were revelations that a religious tract issued by Family First candidate Danny Nalaya had implored Christians to pray to bring down Satan's strongholds, including bottle shops, brothels and Buddhist temples.
You have recently had to issue a press release mollifying Muslims after a call by your Senate candidate in Victoria, Danny Nalaya, to pull down Satan's workshops, including mosques and Freemasons temples.
Well, once again, Tracy, we have disassociated ourselves with any personal opinions on that issue.
Yes, the Mel Award handed out each week to the politician who most disgraces themselves on the campaign trail. And this week it goes not to an individual, but to an entire political party. And I can think of none more deserving than Family First.
Yes, Family First, the new ultra-conservative political force who've consistently denied their Christian links, despite the fact that a vast number of their candidates are pastors at the Assemblies of God Church.
So, for denying their Christian links, but then waging an open war on Satan, the Family First Party are the very deserving winners of this week's Mal.
The day after some stuff happened up in Queensland, stupid comments, and we dealt with that immediately, I had a meeting with the Prime Minister, and as I walked into his office, he said, "Welcome to politics." And he said, we have people that make silly comments as well. And he totally understood and I guess had a degree of empathy with the situation that we were facing at that particular moment about people that were making loose comments and using language that we wouldn't want them to use that represent the party.
There's one particular issue that was raised by Mr Harris with me a couple of weeks ago, and that is the desirability of having formal family impact statements in cabinet submissions. In a sense, we do that already, but in a very informal way, and I've said that we'd be very happy to do that. I think it's a very good suggestion.
Do you think it's healthy for Australian democracy to have a religious party, a party closely associated with the Assemblies of God Church? I've got a letter from the Family First Queensland Senate candidate John C. Lewis to a church minister, and he says in that, among other things, that there's a need for a voice in Canberra that upholds the family unit of our society based on biblical standards. Is that what you want?
No, I want the policies that I've practiced for 30 years. I mean, I put the family at the centre of national life, but I don't go around preaching to people. You know that.
After an erratic week under intense media scrutiny, one thing was certain. Most of Australia had now heard of Family First.
Sky News poll, which minor party will get your preference? Vote Democrats 21, Family First 36, Greens 36, other 7. Family First are polling very strongly. This is wonderful.
Andrea sought the pre-election blessing of her Christian friends at a modest church gathering.
The voters are undecided, 10% of them don't know which way to vote. Well, I believe tonight we can move the hand that moves the world. As we pray and worship our God, then He is able to change things behind the scenes and overcome the principalities and powers and bring confusion on the enemy. Yes, give us wisdom, understanding and courage. Thank you, Father. Thank you, Jesus. Praise you, Lord. And give her wisdom when she gives her lady's speech.
Family First Party?
October 9th, the day has arrived.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
And good luck.
Thank you very much. And I feel quietly excited about today and how today is going to unfold. This process has been quite challenging and demanding, and I know that I've grown as a person, changed as a person, and been influenced to look at life in different ways. And so Andrew Mason isn't the same person as I was 6 weeks ago or even 2 months ago.
Not a bad shot. Right, yeah, thanks, Andrew. That's good. Great.
One of Andrea's mentors, prominent Indigenous elder Lewitcha O'Donoghue, made no secret of her disappointment with the party's policies.
That's basically, I support you personally.
Yes.
I don't support the party, and I'm not happy about your campaign against the Greens. References to Howard is just not on, as far as I'm concerned. He's not been good for Indigenous issues. Hasn't been good for refugees and, you know, and all the rest of it.
In the seat of Brisbane, Family First candidate Charles Newington came face to face with gay activists, still reeling from the previous week's anti-gay publicity.
You're disgusting homophobes. It's disgusting that you would say that lesbians should be burned. Homophobia is an endorsed policy of your party, and that is disgusting.
We're not trying to make a statement that's an anti-gay statement. What we're saying is we're making a pro-family statement.
Don't tell people who can get married and who can't get married. It's none of your business. Well, you get married to a woman, I'll get married to a woman, and you can get fucked. That's all.
Okay. That was a dialogue.
In Adelaide, Family First candidate banners were set alight, and volunteers in Melbourne had flaming matches flicked at them in a gesture motivated by the burning lesbian comments.
Depending on what happens. It's been a pretty torrid 6 weeks. We've done everything within our capacity to make this campaign work. We're young and we're fresh, and we've done it differently. The Prime Minister said to me that we've made a lot of noise, and that's what we wanted to do.
Family First there?
Made a few mistakes along the way, but overall we've got our message out, and I get a sense that the people of Australia like what we're saying.
As election night unfolded, it became very clear that the Conservative coalition government would be returned with an increased majority, and that the debut of Family First had made a surprising impact.
Family First are averaging 2.7, so at their first election they've certainly passed the Democrats and One Nation, but 2.7 means that in some seats where they have polled 5 and 6%, their preferences have been important.
Now, Nick mentioned, I know that Family First favours your side of politics, but I wonder how healthy it is for a party to be entering the political fray that is so strongly religious-based, particularly with that strong connection back to Assemblies of God.
I'm surprised the way the Australian media has suddenly thought there's something insidious about this. That's frankly rather, I'm not accusing you of that, but it is rather odd, the commentary on Family First, that a party that has a Christian-based set of values is something to be surprised about.
In North Adelaide, the party faithful gathered to celebrate perceived answers to their collective prayers as their party's influence became evident.
Andrew Mason, you've been tuning in. Clearly a very, very positive result for a first-time party. Why do you think you've been so successful first time around?
Australia is deciding that they want to have a family-friendly parliament, and Family First is part of this new wave of parties wanting to really promote family policies in our federal parliament, and that's pleasing for us that we're part of this new wave of change.
That's good. Look, and see, we're matching the Greens.
And we're killing the Democrats.
The Family First executives watched on as the big screen showed the extent of their success.
We won that seat for the Liberals.
Yes, we did. Yes, we did.
For the radical left, it was a bad night.
Bob is back in the forest. How do we know? What are the figures for South Australia?
Still around 4%, but because the Liberals are so high, that helps us.
What do you reckon, Digby?
3.
3?
Confident of 3.
3.
Tassie,
South Australia and Victoria.
And Queensland's really, I think, just too hard.
If Pauline hadn't run the campaign, we would have got that seat.
Yep.
But whatever happens, if we get the one Senate seat, guess what?
That's right.
The world has changed.
As they keep on saying, 7 weeks ago,
you
did not exist.
That's
in
right.
anybody's head.
That's exactly.
That's what Brian Houston said to me. Great to have everybody.
At the close of election night counting, Family First had achieved over 2.5% across the contested seats, and their preferences had determined the outcome in at least 8 seats.
Tuesday.
3 Senate candidates were still polling strongly, and it seemed that they may have achieved their impossible dream, the balance of power.
When it looked like Family First would have the balance of power in the Senate, they started to roll out some of their proposed policies. Andrea Mason said that they may approve the full sale of Telstra in exchange for an official sorry from the Prime Minister to our Indigenous people, and there was talk of a Child Abuse Royal Commission and having an Asylum Seekers Summit. But of course, all bets were off when the coalition won power in the Senate in its own right, but it would have been a very interesting upper house if Family First had actually had the balance of power.
The holy grail of their fervent crusade had eluded them. It was a bitter blow for the party and the individual candidates. Andrea Mason's personal vote was high, and she'd polled strongly overall, but ultimately missed out on a South Australian Senate seat.
Obviously, when you put a plan together and a strategy, the whole goal is to get to the end, and having succeeded. But we can certainly take away from this campaign so many positive things.
Andrea is back at her job in State Parliament and will continue to build the profile of Family First. She's determined to stand at the next federal election. Jackie Petrusma fell short of a Senate seat by only 300 votes. She is set to launch an out-and-out assault at the Tasmanian state election.
Went from not being involved in politics at all, and then all of a sudden being catapulted to nearly winning a Senate seat. So that was a fantastic opportunity, and it's given us a fantastic grounding for being set up for this state.
Hello Tina, how are you?
After a hard-fought but ultimately unsuccessful campaign, John Lewis has decided to retire from his church. He is currently considering a future in Queensland state politics.
I think Queensland is looking for a positive alternative to what they have. And if we could come up with a good, clear voice and good policies, I reckon we could do a lot of good for this state of Queensland.
The real success story was Steve Fielding, who astonished the analysts by creating a preference flow which secured him a Victorian Senate seat with only 1.9% of the vote. As the sole Senator-elect, it is now his responsibility to carry the torch of Family First into the Senate.
I can say to the Australian people, we are not a puppet of any other political party.
People are already talking about in the party, let's get geared up for the next federal campaign and make sure we go for it, and they're putting in infrastructure right now to make it all happen, and we're only talking 2 weeks from the election. So there's this enormous momentum that's built out of this, not only in our frame, but in the frame of the media, in the frame of politics, in the frame of how corporations are going to operate. A whole range of people want to now engage with us because they see we're going to be influential in political outcomes.
One of the questions about Family First is, do they have the stamina to actually do the hard yards in terms of policy, the detailed work that comes with being a member of the House of Review, which is what the Senate is? They really need to move very quickly outside that fairly tight Assemblies of God circle and bring others on board the glory train.
They were lucky to get a person in this time round. And now Liberal and Labor have both got the message. I think you'll hear a lot more talk on values and morality over the next few years. You'll hear a lot more politicians bold enough and brave enough to confess to being Christians. And that's got to take some of the support from under them.
I tend to think at the moment that Family First is not going to assume in Australia the position that the political right in the United States have, the religious right in the United States have, simply because Australians aren't churchgoers. And the Australian ethos about religion is it doesn't like institutional finger-wagging religion. It doesn't like religion that tells you what you should be doing.
Back at Paradise Church, the candidates and organisers celebrated, with more than 3,000 Christians from all around the country. In only 12 weeks, the Family First Party had been instrumental in influencing the outcome of the federal election. The evangelical Christians had flexed their political muscle, and the nation responded. They celebrated their federal crusade with raised hands and voices.
Come on up. We'd like to give you a great... Senator Steve Fielding. Father, we just pray right now for these wonderful team of people. Oh God, I pray that tonight that you would just touch their lives. I pray you would empower them, you would energize their lives so they might make a huge difference. Lord, that just as has been a difference made in this state, there's now come an incredible influence and a difference made to the families of our nation. We pray for your blessing in Jesus' mighty name. Amen. Come on, let's give them a hand as they take their seats.